General speeches. At 3 p.m. Eastern, debate over continuing programs for small, high-tech, and research firms, and they'll set that aside at 4:30 Eastern for a judicial nomination, with a vote on the nomination scheduled for 5:30.
The account we must one day give to you. Empower the members of this body to be faithful stewards of your good gifts. May they use their influence and power to bring glory to your name in all the earth. May their lives provide exemplary models of excellence for others to follow. And Lord, we continue to ask you to guard our troops in harm's way. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with freedom and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 28, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
First of all, Mr. President, I welcome you and everyone back after a break that we had doing work at home. I hope everyone had a productive week. The past week was a productive one for the most crucial and most closely watched discussion in Congress, our negotiations to keep the country running with a responsible budget for the rest of the fiscal year. Though the Senate and House chambers have been dark, senators and members of Congress worked together every day last week. Me, my staff, White House, and the House of Representatives, members of both parties, members of congressional leadership, and members of the appropriation committees. We've all been in contact. We've worked hard to make progress and pursue an agreement and a budget that best serves the American people. Democrats' priorities and goals have not changed from day one. We're committed to a long-term budget based in reality, not ideology. We're committed to keeping the country running, not using the American people as political pawns or to score political points. We're more than willing to make smart cuts, but we're unwilling to do so on the backs of hardworking middle-class families and the jobs that they depend on. We're ready to make tough choices that strengthen our country, strengthen our economy, but won't make arbitrary or careless cuts that weaken it. Let me briefly update the Senate on the progress of these talks and how far we have yet to go. On our side of the negotiating table, we've made a proposal. That proposal makes significant cuts, but will not hurt our fragile economy. We're also honest with ourselves and the country. We readily recognize that in the end, we won't get everything that we want. That's true of any fair and reasonable negotiation. We recognize that sacrifices are at the cost of consensus and that we believe they're worth it. But on the other side, Republicans refuse to negotiate on a final number. That's because the biggest gap in this negotiation isn't between Republicans and Democrats. It's between Republicans and Republicans. The infighting between the Tea Party and the rest of the Republican Party, including the Republican leadership in Congress, is keeping our negotiating partner from the negotiating table. And it's pretty hard to negotiate without someone on the other side of the table to talk to. Republicans have to resolve their own deep disagreements before we can find a middle ground between the two parties. We've tried to wait patiently for them to do that, but our patience and the American people's patience is wearing very, very thin. We have only 2 weeks before the current temporary budget expires. Time is not on our side, so it's time, I say to my Republican colleagues, get to work. Work out your differences. I once again remind the Senate that our willingness to compromise is in recognition of reality. We've already voted on a Democratic proposal and a Republican proposal. We've seen in practice, not just theory, that neither plan can pass unless it's adjusted. We all know that neither party can pass a bill without the other party, and neither chamber can send that bill to the President without the other chamber. Democrats have long ago acknowledged that we need Republicans to pass a bill. But Republicans still haven't admitted to themselves they'll need Democrats to pass this bill. Cooperation and compromise are not just good ideas. They're not political slogans. They're essential to the end game. With cooperative spirit and willingness to compromise, we can move the country forward. Without them, we can't. It's as simple as that. I can only speak, Mr. President, for my Democrats when I say we're ready to negotiate and to legislate. We're ready to do our jobs. But we can't negotiate with ourselves, and we won't negotiate through the media. Once Republicans settle their own internal disagreements and decide for what they stand, we'll get this done. Until that happens, the country waits, watches, and worries. Mr. President, following any remarks of Senator McConnell, if he does wish to speak, there will be a period of morning business until 3 p.m. today. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. At 3 p.m., the Senate will resume consideration of the Small Business Jobs Bill. There are currently 10 amendments pending. We'll continue to work through them in order to complete action on this bill this week. At 4:30 today, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 40, which is the nomination of May D'Agostino of New York, the United States District Judge for the Northern District of New York. At 5:30 p.m., the Senate will vote on that judgeship that needs to be filled. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Senator Bozeman be recognized at 2:30 p.m. for up to 20 minutes to make his maiden speech to the United States Senate.
Without objection.
Mr. Chair, announce morning business, please.
The clerk will call the roll. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 3 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
You're watching live coverage from the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2. The Senate gavelled back in after a week-long break. They're beginning with general speeches, and at 3 o'clock Eastern, they're going to be debating a continuing program for small, high-tech, and research firms. They'll set that aside at 4:30 Eastern for judicial nominations, with a vote on a nomination for the Northern District of New York scheduled for 5:30. Then they'll return back to the small business bill, with a number of amendments pending, and more are expected throughout the week. On the other side of the Capitol, the House is not in session today. They'll return tomorrow, and they'll consider whether to extend Federal Aviation Administration programs. Current authorization for the FAA expires Thursday, and you can see live House coverage on our companion network, C-SPAN. Taking a look at some of the news today, President Barack Obama has gained a strong endorsement of his decision to have U.S. forces lead the international air campaign against Libya. As the Associated Press reports, Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter has written in the San Diego Union Tribune that Obama could have watched a humanitarian crisis unfold, but instead stood with the international community. And the congressman's father chaired the Armed Services panel. We'll bring you live coverage of the President's upcoming speech tonight on Libya. It'll be at 7:30 Eastern. And taking a look at some more of the news, Japanese officials insist there's no threat to public health from traces of plutonium that were found in the soil outside of a nuclear reactor there. And plutonium is a key ingredient in nuclear weapons. It's also present in the fuel that's been used at the complex, which has been leaking radiation for over 2 weeks. Some of the news coming from the Associated Press today.
Republican leader.
I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today as the American naval aviators in the Mediterranean wait offshore to fly combat missions against the Libyan army, as Marines wait for the call to go ashore to rescue a downed pilot, or as Air Force pilots fly combat air patrol, we are confident that all military orders will be met with the same professionalism and skill we have come to expect of our all-volunteer force. The valor and loyalty of the men and women of our nation's armed forces have never been in question. And yet, despite that certainty, many Americans view our military intervention in Libya with anxiety and uncertainty. They're wondering why U.S. forces are once again engaged in combat action against an Arab regime in the Middle East. They're wondering when this operation will end and when their loved ones will return. And they're asking another reasonable question: what is the mission? If the American people are uncertain as to our military objectives in Libya, it is with good cause. The President has failed to explain up to this point what follows the evident establishment of a no-fly zone over Libya as it was originally described. Further, the President has articulated a wider political objective of regime change in Libya that is not the stated objective of our military intervention, nor is it the mandate of the UN resolution that the President has used as a justification for our military efforts there. So now that the objective of establishing a no-fly zone has been reached and our NATO allies are ready to assume the command and execution of this mission, it's fair to ask, what is the role of our military and military alliance in providing support to an opposition that we are only now beginning to understand? These concerns and questions are equally relevant here in the Senate and in the Congress, since it is the responsibility of Congress to declare war, if it is war, and of course to fund our military operations. Now, the President has stated there is no decision I face as your Commander-in-Chief that I consider as carefully as the decision to ask our men and women to use military force, particularly at a time when our military is fighting in Afghanistan and winding down our activities in Iraq. That decision is only made more difficult. And yet this latest decision was taken without adequate consultation with Congress or sufficient explanation to the American people. Since returning from South America, the President has begun to talk in greater detail about our involvement in Libya. For the second time, he's discussed our operations in and around Libya with the congressional leadership. Over the weekend, he devoted his entire address to the topic, and he'll speak to the American people tonight about our operations in Libya. All of this is welcome and, in my view, overdue. Before addressing what answers I hope to hear from the President this evening, let me address the notifications to Congress that the President has made. Prior to the initiation of combat activities in Libya, the congressional leadership received 2 forms of notification of the President's decision to order Americans into harm's way. Prior to departing for his overseas trip, the President notified the congressional leadership of his plans to send American forces into combat action in a limited, discrete role to destroy the integrated air defenses of the Libyan government and to enable our allies to establish a no-fly zone over Libya. The second notification was a written communication as part of his responsibilities under the War Powers Resolution. Throughout his communications with the congressional leadership, the President has emphasized that the United States military would not undertake ground combat against the Libyan army, and that the American combat role would be limited in time, scope, and would be used simply as a means to set the conditions for our European allies and Arab partners to carry out the measures authorized by the UN Security Council resolution. The President, his military advisors, and commanders have explained that the overwhelming American capabilities to destroy enemy air defenses, target command and control structures, jam communication signals, and monitor the battlefield would all be employed to allow NATO and the coalition to assume responsibility for the no-fly zone. It was the limited nature of our combat role that encouraged me that the President was acting within his Article II authorities as Commander-in-Chief. And the actions by NATO over the past few days to take over command and responsibility for the no-fly zone are consistent with the President's commitment that limited U.S. actions will set the stage for further action by our coalition partners. Here I'm reminded of the important contribution of Secretary of Defense Robert Gates in advising the President since he came to office. The President is fortunate to be able to call upon the wisdom of this seasoned national security expert in considering our operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in Libya. It was Secretary Gates who reminded the American people of the risk inherent in military intervention. I know his views will be critical as we transfer further responsibilities to the coalition, and I hope the administration pays close attention to what he says. This week, NATO will consider the last part of the mission that must be transferred, what the United Nations resolution refers to as protection of civilian personnel has included attacks on Libyan ground forces and strike missions conducted by American warplanes. If U.S. military forces were to have responsibility for close air support or execute additional strike missions in support of opposition forces, then that, of course, would exceed the President's definition of a limited supporting role. Such a mission could last indefinitely and would trigger congressional consideration of our larger role in the war. Now, my expectation is that the President will explain this transfer of responsibility in his speech tonight, and that NATO will resolve this issue this week, ending our efforts there as the primary force. As the commander of U.S. Africa Command, General Carter Ham, has said, our mandate, again, our mission, is to protect civilians from attack by the regime ground forces. Our mission is not to support any opposition forces. General Ham has also said we do not operate in direct support of the opposition forces. So as President Obama addresses the nation this evening, like many Americans, I'll be listening for answers to the following questions. When will the U.S. combat role in the operation end? Will America's commitment end in days, not weeks, as the President promised? What will be the duration of the non-combat operation, and what will be the cost? What national security interests of the United States justified the risk of American life? What is the role of our country in Libya's ongoing civil war? The President made clear that our combat forces' role in Libya will be limited in scope and duration. Tonight, I hope he will reiterate that pledge or ask Congress before extending the duration or scope of our mission there. And as always, our thoughts are with the brave young Americans in places like Helmand Province and Baghdad, those in Japan helping the Japanese people recover from the natural disaster there, and those who are once again off the shores of Tripoli. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I rise on the floor of this chamber for the first time as a senator, and I am honored to have this opportunity to be a voice for Arkansans who want to change the direction our country is headed so that we will still have a great nation to leave behind for future generations, just as the greatest generation did for us. I'm eager to carry out the traditions of this body, and I'm honored to serve alongside my distinguished colleagues. The traditions set forth and established in this chamber have long been admired and often imitated in governments around the world. The work done here sets an example of how people of different backgrounds and expertise can come together for the betterment of the country. We need to provide results by balancing the budget, cutting the deficit, creating jobs, and putting our differences aside to work for the best interest of our country. I'm up for the task assigned by the American people. We are a nation of great thinkers and innovators and I'm confident that the ideas proposed and debated here will put us on the continued path to success. There is no question that we have faced difficult times in our nation's history. We have been tried and tested before. We have weathered the storms and have always emerged as a better, stronger country. The debates and the issues that we face today are just as challenging as those faced by the men and women who served in this body before us. As the first Republican elected to this Arkansas Senate seat since Reconstruction, it's evident that Arkansans and all Americans are anxious for new results, with new leaders to move our country into the future. When I look back at the senators who have served the great state of Arkansas, I'm inspired by their service, dedication, and commitment. Growing up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, in Sebastian County, we were taught at an early age about William Sebastian. At 36, he was the youngest senator in the 30th U.S. Congress, after leading an already distinguished career as a cotton farmer, judge, and state legislator. Hattie Caraway broke the glass ceiling, becoming the first woman to serve in the United States Senate. She recognized the important role of agriculture to our state and requested a seat on the Agricultural Committee. There is no doubt agriculture is still critical to the state today. My predecessor, Senator Blanche Lincoln, was the first woman to chair the Agriculture Committee, and I'm pleased to have a seat on that same committee and be part of the debates and discussions as we formulate future agriculture policies. Throughout history, our state has been represented in this body by a diverse group of men and women who have put Arkansas and America first, and I'm honored to follow in their footsteps. Each of these individuals had their generation's crises. We have our own as well. Mr. President, the American people are worried, and rightfully so. Some of them have to check the morning news to see if they still have a job. Many other able-bodied, ready-to-work Americans have not received a paycheck for months, some for years now. Between November and December of last year, unemployment rates increased in 72 of the 75 counties in my home state of Arkansas. And these aren't small hits to our communities. A plywood plant in Fordyce, a town of 5,000, closed its doors, displacing almost 350 workers. That's more than 14% of the town's population. It's not any easier in the state's larger cities either. In Fort Smith, Arkansas's second largest city, a leading appliance manufacturer laid off 850 employees last year. Even our nation's largest retailer and Arkansas's largest employer is not immune to this crisis. The economic downturn forced Walmart to cut hundreds of jobs in its corporate office in Bentonville, Arkansas. Like much of the rest of the nation, Arkansas's job creators are nervous. It's hard for a small business owner to invest in their business and create jobs if they are concerned about the negative impact actions in Washington will have on their bottom line. Given the right tools and circumstances, small business owners can and will create good-paying jobs for the people of Arkansas and all Americans. We need to create policies that empower the private sector. That means fostering an environment that promotes economic certainty and encourages growth and innovation. We can see the results of the combined efforts of city, county, state, and federal leaders with Mitsubishi's decision to build a wind turbine manufacturing plant in Fort Smith. The region's business leaders spent more than a year competing with more than 60 other U.S. cities to attract Mitsubishi, resulting in as many as 400 new, good-paying jobs in the Fort Smith community. This, Mr. President, is how we stimulate the economy. Unfortunately, instead of taking that approach to creating a business-friendly environment in our communities, Washington's agenda over the past few years has created a climate of uncertainty. From past experience, I know this hampers the private sector's ability to create jobs. Before entering public service, I practiced optometry at a clinic that my brother, I, and my brother-in-law started in Rogers, Arkansas. Over the course of 24 years, our little clinic grew from 5 employees to 85 employees, and now is a leading eye care provider in Northwest Arkansas. We were able to grow over the years because we could plot our course with some degree of certainty. While no one can see the future, we could, with a fair degree of confidence, understand what our tax burden would be, what our energy cost would be, and what our health care cost would be. What we are hearing today from small business owners and investors is the exact opposite. They are afraid to invest any capital because they don't know what their taxes will be, afraid to hire another employee because they are nervous about what that does to their health care cost, and afraid to expand until they know how big their energy bill is going to be. Compound that uncertainty with the excessive spending, and you have a recipe for disaster. While Americans tighten their belts, they watch in disbelief as Washington throws taxpayer money around with reckless abandonment. The extent of this problem is documented in a recent report by the Government Accountability Office. The report highlights wasteful spending by revealing a number of duplicative programs within the federal government, which come with a price tag estimated to be in the billions. There is simply no room for wasteful spending, especially when much of that money isn't ours. 40 cents of every dollar we spend is borrowed, much of which is owed to countries that are not always friendly to us. Countries like Saudi Arabia, China, the latter of which now owns more than $1 trillion of our debt. In testimony before Congress, Admiral Mike Mullen said the greatest threat to our sovereignty is not Iran, not al-Qaeda, not radical Islam, it's our national debt. He's right. We simply cannot continue to operate at this pace. We cannot continue to add billions to our already staggering national debt. This year alone, the federal government will spend $3.7 trillion while only collecting $2.2 trillion. It doesn't take an advanced math degree to understand that 3 is greater than 2. The average American family doesn't have the luxury to spend beyond its means. Their government shouldn't and doesn't either. The only way we will get a handle on this situation is to reform the manner in which we budget and allocate federal dollars. It's time we put mechanisms in place to stop the government from spending beyond its means. This is why one of the first bills that I signed my name onto after taking the oath of office was Senator Richard Shelby's balanced budget amendment. Senator Shelby has been a champion on this front for a number of years, introducing this bill every session of Congress since 1987. Imagine what the country would look like if it had passed this when it first proposed it. Now more than ever, it's an idea that's time has come, and I look forward to working with the senator from Alabama to get some sort of a spending cap like a balanced budget amendment passed. This is a catalyst for change. It holds us to spending limits and forces changes in the manner in which taxpayer money is allocated. We are at a crossroads in our country. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. The tax, spend, borrow philosophy is not creating jobs. It's only creating more debt for our children and for our grandchildren. We owe it to the generation of Americans who've made sacrifices in order for our country to prosper, and that means working together to solve our problems. No matter what political views we hold, at the end of the day, we're all Americans who are committed to seeing our country succeed. As a child, I learned that commitment from my dad, who retired as a master sergeant in the Air Force. He followed in the footsteps of his dad, who served in the armed forces during World War I and World War II. And even before him, my great-great-uncle James Davis served as U.S. Secretary of Labor under Presidents Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover before serving in this chamber. We have a great ability through the power of this office that allows us to help Americans with issues that they are facing. For our veterans who return home, the Senate office can be a huge resource. That's what helped my mom's dad when he returned at the end of World War I. After surviving being gassed at the close of the war, his lungs didn't function properly, and he reached out to my great-great-uncle, Senator Davis, to help with his disability. Today, as our service members return from tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, we have the same responsibilities to the men and women who fight for our freedoms and interests in our country. No matter what major legislative crisis we are facing, we have a responsibility to these brave men and women. And the debates that take place in this body are of no doubt of great importance. But so is each constituent who is having trouble with a federal agency. In some cases, we are their last resort to overcome a major obstacle in their lives. And each and every case that comes before us must be given our undivided attention. When I was first elected to Congress as a member of the House in 2001, former Congressman John Paul Hammerschmidt, who represented the 3rd District of Arkansas for 26 years, gave me some excellent advice. He said, "John, always remember, now that the election is over, there are no more Republicans, no more Democrats, only the people of Arkansas, and you need to take care of them." That is the key to good governing and good public service. Nobody embodied that more than John Paul. He was and is a dedicated public servant and has been a wonderful mentor during my time on Capitol Hill. I think Arkansas's new congressional delegation is going to make John Paul proud. Certainly our senior Senator Mark Pryor has embodied John Paul's mantra of taking care of the people of Arkansas. I've enjoyed working with Senator Pryor while serving the 3rd District of Arkansas and appreciate his leadership. I really believe that our delegation, working together, will be able to make a difference for the people of Arkansas and for our nation. The senators who served Arkansas before, Senator Pryor and myself, and those who have sat at these very desks, understood that their desk never belonged to them personally. It's always belonged to the American people. And my name, carved in the desk, will always remind me that I am here to serve them. I'm humbled and honored that the people of Arkansas have selected me to work from this desk for the next 6 years, and I will never forget why. I'm here to be their voice, address their needs, and help tackle these great challenges we face as a nation. And I look forward to working with each and every one of my colleagues to accomplish our mutual goals to keep our country on the path of prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
Mr. President, I want to congratulate our colleague from Arkansas on his first speech here in the Senate, and just remark at how fortunate the people of Arkansas are to have him here to represent them. I was particularly interested in the history lesson that he taught us about various individuals who served the state of Arkansas, both in the seat he now holds and other positions of responsibility. Again, on behalf of all the senators, I congratulate the junior senator from Arkansas on his initial speech.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate just taking a break here for a quorum call. They're coming back from a week-long March break all last week, and they'll take up programs for small high-tech and research firms shortly. And they'll set that debate aside at 4:30 Eastern for a judicial nomination. A vote on that nomination has been scheduled for 5:30. And the Senate will round out this session with more debate on the small business bill, and there are a number of amendments pending and more expected throughout the week. The House is not in session today. They'll return tomorrow when members will consider extending the Federal Aviation Administration's programs. Current FAA authorization expires on Thursday. You can watch the House live on our companion network C-SPAN when members return tomorrow. And President Obama prepares to address the American people tonight. He'll be speaking about Libya as NATO leaders continue diplomatic and military moves to take control of the international mission there. As VOA News and the AP report, NATO officials say arming the rebels in Libya is not an option. Airstrikes by coalition forces have allowed rebels to advance on government-controlled areas today. NATO commanders say they're not taking sides in the conflict and that they aim solely to protect civilians, as spelled out by the UN Security Council authorization. NATO could take over Operation Command within a few days. We'll bring you the President's speech on the moves in Libya later tonight at 7:30 Eastern Time.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I take this time to inform my colleagues of legislation that I've introduced today to establish a National Blue Alert Act. This would establish a nationwide program for Blue Alert. It would be similar to what we do for Amber Alert today. Amber Alert, as you know, when abducted children, we use the communication system nationwide to get information out about the abductor so that we can get the public assisting law enforcement in apprehending the individuals responsible for the abduction of a child. My legislation would establish a similar system of disseminating information when a police officer has been murdered or severely injured as a result of a violent attack against a police officer. This bill would help in keeping our law enforcement safer by removing these individuals who've committed these horrible crimes off the street sooner and holding them accountable for their act. Every day, 900,000 law enforcement officers go out in our community to keep us safe. They're the front line for public safety. They put their lives on the line, and our community is much safer as a result of their actions, and we want to do everything we can to help our law enforcement officers. In recent years, too many have lost their lives in the line of duty. We need to do something about that. In Prince George's County, Maryland today, I joined with law enforcement officers at the FOP Lodge 89 to talk about this legislation. There's a Fallen Heroes Memorial located at that FOP Lodge to honor the law enforcement officers in Prince George's County who gave their lives in the line of duty. Unfortunately, there's 26 individuals who are honored at that Fallen Heroes Memorial. They have lost their lives since 1937. Our superintendent of state police was also there, and we recalled a state trooper, Wesley Brown, who died in June of last year in Forestville at the age of 24, serving his community. I mention Trooper Brown specifically because as a result of Trooper Brown's death, Governor O'Malley, the governor of Maryland, took executive action to establish a Blue Alert system in the state of Maryland. We now have 9 other states that have joined Maryland. We have 10 states altogether that have established their own Blue Alert programs so that we can assist in the capture of those who murder or seriously injure our law enforcement officers. We need to use technology the best that we can to help those who are serving our community. My legislation would make that program nationwide. I'm proud that we have bipartisan co-sponsorship, Senator Graham, Senator Leahy, Senator Klobuchar, and Senator Coons. It complements the work being done by Attorney General Holder in his Law Enforcement Officer Safety Initiative. The purpose here is to try to keep our law enforcement officers safer and keep the community safer. And we think both are achieved by using a Blue Alert system nationwide. I'm also pleased to say that it has the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police and the concern of police survivors, the cops. And I would urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation. I hope that we can get it enacted shortly because I think this can really help us in living up to our commitment to help those who serve us. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senator from Arizona.
Are we in a quorum call? I ask unanimous consent for the proceedings of the quorum call be dispensed with, and I speak up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last Wednesday marked the one-year anniversary of the deeply flawed health care bill. The worst aspect of that bill, I believe, is that it will lead to health care rationing by the federal government. That is, the delay and denial of care in order to control costs. Now, the words ration
withhold coverage and delay access to care, of course, are not found anywhere in the bill. But new federal rules that aim to reduce health care costs will inevitably result in delayed or denied tests, treatments, and procedures deemed too expensive, and in less innovation in the development of drugs and devices and treatments. Many of the decisions will be based on information provided by a new entity called the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, sometimes referred to as the PCORI. That will conduct comparative effectiveness research. Now, comparative effectiveness research weighs the effectiveness of 2 or more health care services or treatments. The goal is to provide patients and doctors with better information regarding the risks and benefits of, for example, a drug versus a surgery for a particular situation. The problem is not with the merits of the research, but whether the research should be used by the government to determine treatments and services covered by your insurance. And the health care law actually empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to do just that, to use this comparative effectiveness research when making coverage determinations. Section 6301 of Obamacare states clearly, and I quote, "The Secretary may use evidence and findings from research conducted by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute." Mr. President, that means that the government, not patients and doctors, has the power to make health care decisions that affect you. A bureaucrat decides if your health care is an effective use of government resources, without regard to the patient's individual needs and medical history. The end result is the government inevitably interferes with access to care. That's rationing, and it's wrong. While Obamacare includes limited safeguards for how this research may be used, appreciating the dangers involved here, there's nothing that prohibits the government from taking it into account when, for example, making Medicare coverage decisions. In fact, when asked whether the federal CER agency should be involved in cost determinations, Donald Berwick, the president of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, responded, quote, "The social budget is limited," end of quote. Ask citizens in Britain how well the system is working in their country. Britain's National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, called NICE, routinely uses comparative effectiveness research to make cost-benefit calculations. Last year, NICE rejected a cutting-edge drug, Avastin, used to treat bowel cancer because it said the drug's limited effectiveness for extending life, they said 6 weeks, but up to 5 months, according to the chief executive of the organization Beating Bowel Cancer. They said it didn't justify the cost. As Mike Hobday, head of the policy at the charity Macmillan Cancer Support, told Britain's Daily Telegraph, quote, "We think this is devastating news for cancer patients with metastatic colorectal cancer, especially as this drug could have a significant impact on people's quality of life. Although a few extra weeks or months might not sound much to some people, it can mean an awful lot to a family affected by cancer," end of quote. Likewise, in August 2008, NICE recommended against coverage of 4 expensive drugs for advanced kidney cancer. NICE considered the drugs clinically beneficial in specific situations, but concluded, I'm quoting here, that they were not cost-effective within their licensed indications, end of quote. Health care in Britain is also routinely delayed. Several years ago, the country's National Health Service launched an End Waiting, Change Lives campaign. End Waiting, Change Lives. The campaign's goal was to reduce a patient's wait time to 18 weeks from referral to treatment. That's 4.5 months. And that's an improvement. Government-run health care systems that ration care are the reason that many Europeans and Canadians come to the United States each year to get treatments denied to them in their own countries. Access to the highest quality care and the sacred doctor-patient relationship are the cornerstones of U.S. health care, the very things that Americans value most and that the health care law jeopardizes. So I will join Senators Coburn and Barrasso, Roberts and Crapo in introducing the Preserving Access to Targeted, Individualized and Effective New Treatments and Services Act of 2011. That's also known as the Patients Act. The Patients Act does not prohibit comparative effectiveness research. Rather, it's a pro-patient firewall that protects patients' access to high-quality care by prohibiting the federal government from using comparative effectiveness research to delay or deny care. Additionally, the bill would require comparative effectiveness research to account for differences in the treatment response and preferences of patients, genomics, and personalized medicine, and the unique needs of health disparity populations. And it would clarify that nothing shall be construed as affecting the FDA's commissioner's authority to respond to drug safety concerns. All Americans deserve personalized treatment and should be able to get the care that they and their doctors decide is best for them. No Washington bureaucrat should interfere with that right by substituting the government's judgment for that of a physician. The administration has repeatedly promised that the health care law will not result in rationing. Well, if that promise is true, they should have no problem supporting the Patients Act. I urge my colleagues to join us in co-sponsoring this important legislation. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will